Hello and welcome to the Migration Mapper demo series. My name is Jerod Merkle. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Wyoming and a research associate with the Wyoming Migration Initiative. In this video, I'm going to show you a bit about Module 2, where we're actually going to go through each animal ID in your data set and extract important sequences of movement. So if you get yourself here to the Migration Mapper screen, the main screen, or if you finished up Module 1 and clicked jump to another app, you can get yourself to Module 2. So I'm going to click this, open up Module 2, and it's going to ask me to reload a previous session, and I will do that. And the first thing it's asking me is to build a migration time table. Now, there's a couple of things that are really important with this table, and the first is identifying a biological year. And what this mainly means is this is going to be the start date for when displacement or net square displacement is going to start. And so it defaults February 1st. And so that February 1st is going to be the day at which a biological year starts. And so if you click this, you're going to see on all the plots that they're going to start with February 1st and then end January, at the end of January. You can change these things for a number of different reasons. For instance, maybe your captures occurred in the summer, or you wanted to look at how animals move from their kind of summer period of time. You may want to change this to a summer date or move this to January 1st. There's a number of different reasons, but this is going to drive when your biological year starts. The next thing is you need to identify and tell Migration Mapper how many kind of sets of seasons that you want to manually identify in this app. Typically, this app you would put 2 in here, and for kind of a North American migrant, that would allow you to identify sliders for spring migration and fall migration. And then you could identify the summer and the winter periods between those 2 spring and fall migrations. But there are many other options here. If you have an animal that's a little bit more nomadic, maybe you just want to have 4 or 5 different kind of sliders or seasons that you can identify that the animal's moving in specific periods of the year. We also see potentially some late winter movements. And so potentially you want to have 3 sliders. And so you can identify when an animal makes a late winter movement, you can identify that separately from the spring migration. Or let's say you have a core winter range or core summer range that you want to identify with these. You may want to put 3 sliders, and that's what I'll do for today, is have 3 sliders. And so you click this button, this is going to build a migration table. And this is something once you do this, you can't go back unless you start back over at this part of your project. And the reason that you can't change the sliders is basically there's some chronological nuance to the sliders. And so we want to make sure that if you change the number of sliders, you're going to have to go back and redo all of the work that you've done here. So let me orient you a little bit to this screen. I'm going to zoom out a bit so we can get everything on one page. So basically here we have in the middle here, you have all of your animal IDs and the year, the biological year. And so this is animal ID 1 in 2011. As you can see here, the biological year for 2011 starts February 1st and then goes to January 31st of 2012. You can flip between the forward and backward between the different animal years. And then we can take our sequences here and we can call this migration spring. I could call this one summer, let's say, summer core, and then migration fall. And so we can rename these, and they'll continue and keep that naming scheme forward. And then you have a map here on the left that corresponds to the information here on the right. And A couple other things, you can toggle this base map so you can see the satellite imagery. And you can also add notes for this individual. So for this animal ID year, you could say this was a migratory animal, or you could say this is that animal that did X or Y. So you can have notes for every ID year. And then what we have over here is a number of different tabs to help you kind of identify important movements for this animal. And so let's just start with the spring migration. I'm going to move this slider over and I'm going to grab it. So it's grabbing all of this spring migration with the net square displacement. And to note, I can click on one of these and press the left or right buttons and it'll move one day at a time. And so you can often kind of zoom in here. You can see those green buttons. You can click on this and go right and left. And we can see how, okay, those are the points for that last day on the 29th. And so they are now included. Then the animal moved down here till this day here. And this is where it got to its summer range. Okay, so if you noticed, the summer core now, this slider moved over, so it has to occur after this, and that's how you always have to do your sliders. Is this one's always going to be the first one, this one will always be the second one. But if there's no movement or migration, you can just let this slider be. And so I'm going to grab some summer core here and just say, okay, this is the core summer range, and then the fall migration is this bit here. And so now we back this out, I can see that I have captured all of basically the summer range, the movement, the migration movement up, and then the migration movement back. And so let me now go through a few of the tabs here to kind of orient you with what all we have. So the first thing is we can do this NSD plot and add 6 months of data on either end. This might give you some idea if the animal has more of a complicated movement strategy. You can see what happened before, 6 months before this ID year and 6 months after. There were no data before this one, so we're only seeing what's after. And you can see that animal stayed on its winter range for a while, then left again in the next year. This next tab is the sequence periods NSD. So this will zoom in on where you've actually identified migration and then add about a week of data in between. And then it zooms in again. So this will help you really kind of detail where this animal, so it looks like the animal kind of overshot its summer range and then kind of came back. And so this will help you really zoom in and kind of understand exactly where you're getting your animal or where you're identifying these sequences. We also have a speed plot. You can see in the summer very slow speeds, and then spring, indeed, they're kind of moving a little bit faster. And this fall period is when some of the fastest speeds happen for this animal. We also have a basic elevation plot. It's pretty coarse, but it should give you an idea of how the animal moved relative to migration. And so even here, I can see like this is the main movement of this animal, but it definitely went up in elevation a month before, which probably is the difference between this part of the winter range and then moving up here in late winter, where it actually was a little bit higher elevation. So you can learn about that. And then we can also see that the animal had kind of a transition summer range until it got to the highest elevations on its summer range. And so this is kind of probably this area over here. So if we move this this slider over, we would see more of this being captured, and then it went up in elevation into these areas. Same with this fall migration, had this secondary winter range. So elevation can be quite elucidate a lot of information, especially for more mountain ungulates that do more elevation movements than spatial movements. And the last three tabs are first passage time at 50 meter, 150 meter, and 300 meter resolution. And what these are often used for is folks that are combing through the data to identify if the animal has given birth. So trying to identify partition periods. And this looks pretty messy, But in some cases, you can really see when an animal really slowed down to give birth. And also, remember, these data have 13-hour data during the summer. And so we can see that we have kind of crappy data during this period. And so we're not getting much. But if you're looking to kind of try to figure out, hey, did this animal slow down a whole bunch to give birth? These first passage time tabs can really help that pop out if you want to look at that. So now I want to jump to the next animal year. Got this one done. And so this is now another migration from the same animal. I'm going to go back to the NSD. We're going to move this slider up to here, move this slider right next to it. I'm going to be somewhat quick with some of this stuff for illustration purposes. Get the fall migration. What we tend to do is I tend to at least try to get like 1 day of data on either end of the movement. So you at least have a few GPS points in the seasonal range before they start moving. So this one looks good. Now let's go up to the next animal ID year. Now this is some data that basically only part of a year was collected. So we can just skip this. If we don't move these sliders, they won't be included in the sequences for these seasons. Now we have this individual that has a little bit of a stepped migration or a second summer range. So let's get the spring migration going here. Go back a little bit. Now we got a pretty good amount for spring. And now you can kind of have a look here, like, what is this? So the animal went way up here and kind of overshot its winter range, or its main summer range. And so you could start thinking about, well, maybe these animals have 2 summer ranges. Well, I'm just going to move up here so it's the core summer range, get that section figured out. And then I'll do the fall migration from that secondary winter range. We can also see that it looks like right here, this animal made a movement near its winter range quite early and then came back. There could be a number of reasons for that, but it didn't make it all the way. So I'm going to only identify the movement during its actual fall migration, where it went all the way back to its winter range. Here's the next one. I'm going to jump ahead to this. This is a resident animal. Not a full year of data, so I'm going to skip that. But here is it being a resident. Oh, no, it's not a resident. Okay, it does migrate a little bit. Here's a bit messier migration, but I'll get this going here. Move the slider for it. So that's the spring migration identified. Now I have some choices here, thinking about what is this animal's core summer range. So I'm going to zoom up here so I get some of that area. I'm not sure. I don't really have a strong biological justification for this core summer range. It's more for illustrative purposes. Okay, now I'm going to flip forward. I'm looking for more of a resident animal. See if we have one here. Okay, animal 24 is fairly resident-like. Seems like I mean, when we look at the points, yes, maybe there's a little bit of a different seasonal area that the animal uses during its period of time. But if it's a resident animal or there's no movements, you can just skip moving the sliders altogether and move forward. I could still do summer core if I wanted. So I get this kind of main area that the animal uses during summer. But I'm not seeing any kind of strong migration patterns, although I'm seeing a little bit. Let's see what the elevation profile looks like. Well, yeah, they're using the same elevations around. Okay, I'm going to pause the video and do the rest of these, and I'll come back in a little bit and show you what's next. Hey, I'm back, and I went through all the ID years and moved the sliders for all these different animals. And a couple things I wanted to point out is that when you click this down button, the ones that are red are ones that you have not moved the sliders. And so you can kind of check your work, make sure you didn't forget any animals. These ones that are red are all kind of partial years where I did not move the sliders. Another thing I wanted to show you is that this is displacement squared on the x-axis, but you can switch it to regular displacement. So in actual kilometers instead of kilometers squared. And in some cases, that's a little bit nicer thing to look at. I also wanted to just say a few things. The second to last one was kind of a messy animal. I just wanted to mention a few things. You can see here that the net square displacement where the animal was in February 1st was pretty far down close to this town. And then it moved up kind of this way during winter and then went back to that area down near town late in the winter. And then the actual, one of the first movements, it kind of did some wiggling around and went all the way nearly up to summer range a couple times here. But I basically identified this period, this last time or nearly last time, it was all the way on its winter range. And kind of grabbed it so it moved up into its first time it was up to its summer range, and it stayed for a little bit. It did make another movement back to its winter range, didn't quite make it all the way, and then went back. And then even in the fall, it did a bunch of back and forth movements. I don't know if this is a hunting thing or if this is snow events that brought it down, but then the snow melted and it came back up. But I grabbed the last kind of slow migration down where it made it all the way back to its winter range here. And so that's what I grabbed for the fall migration. So there's a lot of messy movements. There's a kind of this huge area that it spent a lot of time during winter or during fall as it moved back down to its winter range. And then you can see there's this movement here, which tells me that it moved back to that area. It moved to another area during winter range. And this is an animal where potentially having more sliders, for instance, like a late winter movement or a second winter range, you may want to capture some of those movements between a second seasonal range. So anyway, that gives you a little bit of idea of how app2 works. Every time you move the slider, it's saving something into your file. So whenever you want to stop working on this app, you can click jump to another app, and that will take you to back to that home screen where you can identify and go to app 3 or module 3. The last thing I want to tell you is you can click this button called export mig table, and this is going to export a table for you that has every animal ID in a row, and then it has the start and end of your spring migration, core summer, and fall migration. It's going to have all these dates in there for you. And so you can use that table for whatever you want, maybe some syntheses of migration start and end dates, or when partition occurs, or when winter occurs, etc. But you can export that as a CSV by clicking this button and then finding it inside of your folder. So I'm going to click jump to another module and see you at the next video for module 3. Thanks a lot.